Bob, thanks so much for joining me today. 10 years ago, I took a PhD seminar on teams taught by Pam Hines in the MS&E department at Stanford. And that's when I first learned of you and your work. So it's great to catch up with you today.
Oh, it's wonderful. Yeah, Pam, she's my boss now. Don't tell her, but she's the best boss I've ever had in academia. She's almost perfect. It's amazing. So she not only can teach it, she can do it.
Great to hear. I definitely will not tell her that.
I actually tell her that. So I guess we're going to talk about some lessons, huh?
Yeah, I want to hear, as you think back on your career, are there one, two, three simple, practical, underappreciated lessons you've learned that you would most like to pass on to others?
Okay, so I love this question, and I'm such an old academic. Actually, July 1st, and we're June 15th is my 40th anniversary at Stanford. So I'm an old academic. I can't believe I've lasted this long. So I've been thinking about this stuff, and as we discussed, I do have a list of now 17 things I believe. But when I think about it, there's three things, and there's kind of stories associated with each one of them that really strike me as things I guess I would like to pass on. The first one was the name of a book that I never finished, and I think I even got an advance for, called The Attitude of Wisdom. I think I had to give back the advance. I've written 8 books, but this is one that I didn't finish, and so what it was inspired. So it's the notion, and this is not original. I think it goes back to Aristotle or Plato or something. When I see the best leaders, the best innovators, they have this they're very curious, and part of the curiosity they have is, so I think of David Kelly of IDEO. I think of actually, even though he was our university president, John Hennessy, an amazing person, and they have this quality that it's sometimes called The Attitude of Wisdom. That's the name of the book that we gave back the advance for, and essentially they have really strong opinions, but they're always looking for signs that they're wrong, and so David Kelly, the founder of IDEO, the founder of the Stanford Design School. I guess I'm a co-founder, but it was Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. We were just following along with him, and David is the kind of person who will kind of give you a strong argument, and then he just listens, and he listens, and then he asks questions, and then he listens, and he's one of the only people I've ever met that when he walks into a room with one opinion, he very often walks out with a different opinion. And so this sort of attitude of wisdom, this ability to sort of and my favorite story, this is a great story. This has to do with the attitude of wisdom in product prototyping. So you and I, we're like academics, and we've read and seen in the business world, we've seen all sorts of reorganizations, and you've also got a beard, so you can maybe relate to this. So David, who has sort of a Groucho-like mustache, so there was one point, this was out of 20-something years ago, and he had a reorganization at IDEO. And what happened at IDEO is IDEO grew in Palo Alto in those days from about 40 people to about 150 people. So it was too big. You couldn't just have one group of sort of people swarming around. And so he did a reorganization. And most reorganizations, you will go here, you are fired. That's how they work, right? This isn't how David did it. He had 3 people stand up and make a pitch about why you should join my studio to the whole company, and everybody got their first choice, which is like ridiculous. How do you make that work? And then there was still a lot of anxiety, because there always is when there's a reorganization. And the amazing thing he did, he walked in and nobody had ever seen him. He shaved off his mustache. And David, who's really funny, said, "My wife got out of the shower naked and screamed and put on her clothes because she didn't recognize me." That's how, and we were just in shock. And so David stands up and he says, "So the reorganization, it's just like our products. It's just like my mustache. We can grow it back. If it doesn't work, we can change it. This is a two-way door." That, to me, it was one of the most amazing things I ever saw, just in terms of living this attitude of wisdom, kind of a strong opinion. I think this is the right thing, but it's a two-way door. We can reverse it if we get other information. So that's that. When I think of great leaders, just having in this curiosity and openness, and not clinging to things regardless of whether they're right or wrong. And it's just such a learning attitude. So I guess that's why we wanted to write a book about the IDEO of that period, which is a much different company now. But you know how it is. Sometimes you start something, you can't finish it. So that's one. Maybe we can do two more.
Well, I'm grateful we just got the Cliff Notes version of your book. So even though it was never finished, thank you for sharing that. As they say, most books should be articles and most articles should never be written.
Well, it's a paragraph in an Administrative Science Quarterly article about the attitude of wisdom, which I stole from Carl Weick, and I think he stole from somebody else, and we all stole it from Aristotle or Plato. So, Adam Grant's book, Think Again, has a similar sort of theme. So that's one. The second one is something that I would describe as sort of a failure of mine in the institution in the world that we live in right now. And it's something that I think is sort of more serious and related to what the right learning attitude is. And so one of my intellectual heroes, Carl Weick at University of Michigan, now he seems to be sort of retired or semi-retired. But during the period when I was the most active researcher, he was the editor of the Administrative Science Quarterly, the most prestigious journal, and just this really original thinker. And one of the things, at one time, I think I was just talking to him, and we both know, since the research on teams, and we both know the research on teams, there's all sorts of evidence that the best teams, they engage in constructive conflict. They know when to fight, they know when not to fight. And in my book, Good Boss, Bad Boss, I have a whole long list of how to have a good fight and everything. But there's sort of like a problem, and it's especially a Stanford problem. It isn't so bad at Berkeley. I went to Berkeley as an undergrad, that we're really lousy at having constructive conflict as an institution. We're a very passive-aggressive institution. And you can see this in some of the cultures, the Google culture, you can see that, which is sort of a Stanfordish culture. The old HP culture, sort of a culture, is that people are really nice and really friendly. But when they get in a situation of disagreement, they don't know how to have a constructive argument in a way that isn't personal. And since we know the research on teams, that the best teams, the worst teams fight, what do they call that? Personal conflict, emotional conflict. They fight because they kind of hate each other. Just as an institution, and I've tried to come up with ways of teaching this, but the best teams I've ever been part of, the best relationships I've been part of, are ones where we can argue like crazy in the most loving possible way. And it's so hard to teach, and it's so hard to create. And so to go back to Carl Weick, he had this argument, that he had this saying that in the best teams, people argue as if they're right and listen as if they're wrong. So this is kind of back to wisdom. And I early in my career, I wrote a bunch of papers with Anat Raf-Ali on the expression of emotion in organizational life. And the reason I think that Anat and I were so productive and just loved working with each other is we would just yell at each other all day. And we were like children. We'd fight over the keyboard. Literally, we'd grab the keyboard and mouse from one another. And it was always loving and always fun. And I haven't had that in very many of my relationships. I've written, and I love Jeff Pfeffer. I wrote 2 books with him, but with Jeff, it actually didn't really feel. It felt more personal, to be honest. Jeff's pretty nasty, and maybe that comes out with me when I start doing it. It's a little bit too personal with him, and that's the kind of thing that are the best teams. And this is something that there are some organizations that we see this in. Just to give you an example of this, once, so this is 2010 or so, I was giving a talk at Pixar, and our book Good Boss, Bad Boss had just come on. My book, it's a sole author book, had just come out, and I was doing a talk. And in those days I was friendly with Pixar. I knew Ed Catmull. I still know Ed, but he's left. He was president. So I'm doing a talk at Pixar about Good Boss, Bad Boss. I talk about constructive conflict. This guy named John Walker walks up to me afterwards. John Walker was the producer on a bunch of the Incredibles movies. He worked with Brad Bird. So Brad Bird is the famous Academy Award-winning director of the Incredibles and Ratatouille and so forth. And John Walker's job as the producer was basically time, money, and budget. And then he had to deal with this crazy creative guy named Brad Bird. And the way he described it to me is that the way that Brad and I work together is we work in loving conflict every day. And that was one of the most, and by the way, for your audience, if you go to the extra material on The Incredibles, there is an argument. There's an argument on the video where the team is arguing like crazy, and John Walker and Brad Bird are in the room about how bald to make Bob in the movie. So we're bald guys. So I show it to my class, and it's like it's really sort of mad. And there's also a budget versus creativity type argument too. And that to me is, it's almost like the highest form of human existence in creativity. And I've only experienced it myself, only with Anat and with a few other people. But this ability to sort of fight in a loving sort of way, if you can reach it, it's so much better than the sort of passive aggressive and then you stab them in the back type thing, or you suffer because you don't have the courage to complain about it. That to me is what excellence is about.
Well, what a great phrase that captures that. Argue as if you're right, listen as if you're wrong.
Wyke was, he was just magical. And then the last thing, oh God, I've got it right here. Good, I've even got it. So the last thing, and since for better or worse, when I die, somewhere, if somebody writes obituaries about me, somewhere in the third sentence, maybe the second sentence will be that I'm the best-selling author of the No Asshole Rule. I've just finished my 8th book on friction with my pal Huggy Rao, and the No Asshole Rule has sold more than everything together, and it always will. It's just the way it is. But I wrote the wrong book or the right book at the time, and when I was writing, and so the lesson here, I'll do the headline since headlining helps. The lesson here is that it may be because I've had both the privilege and sometimes the problem of living in Silicon Valley for the last 40 years and meeting way too many rich, overly ambitious people, possibly including myself in terms of being overly ambitious. And there's a disease that I see among people who are successful, and I realize this is probably 1% of the world's population, who, no matter how much fame they have, no matter how much money they have, they always feel like they never have enough. They always feel like they want more. They want more toys. They want more prestige. They want more lovers. Whatever it is, like it isn't enough. And so I was writing the No Asshole Rule. And I ran into a poem in the New Yorker, I think it was called Joe Heller, and it was by Kurt Vonnegut, the famous Kurt Vonnegut, and essentially the poem, I won't read it to your audience, but essentially what the poem said was that Joe Heller, the famous author of Catch-22, and Kurt Vonnegut were at a party at a really rich person's house, and so anyways, they were having this conversation about how rich the guy was, and Joe Heller said something to Kurt Vonnegut along the lines of essentially, this guy might be really rich, but you have, maybe he said it about himself, I have something that he never had, which is the knowledge that I have enough. Mm. And it's a poem. And in this notion, and because I read a book about assholes, that for a lot of people, the knowledge that you have enough, that you have enough money, that you have enough people in your life that love you, that you have enough stuff, that I think that sometimes when I start being a jerk and I start engaging in social comparison, because I work at Stanford, there's all these incredibly famous people. When I engage in social comparisons, when I feel like I don't have enough is when my worst self comes out. And so the knowledge that I have enough is part of it. And just the punchline of the story, and I actually have of it. So I wrote just some random address at the New Yorker to ask permission, because my publisher said, you can't publish this poem without permission from Kurt Vonnegut. And he wrote me back a personal postcard. So this is actually a picture of the personal postcard from him. And it says, "Dear Professor Sutton, find here my permission for you to use my poem, Joe Heller, however you use, without compensation or further notice to me. Good luck, signed by Kurt Vonnegut." This is just a Xerox of my favorite possessions. So he had enough too. He could have asked me for money.
Yeah.
And so anyway, in some, and there are a lot of people in the world who don't have enough. I really want to emphasize that.
Right.
But for me, and maybe it's, it's, as I said, both the privilege and the problems with teaching some of the most privileged, smartest people in the world for 40 years, and having colleagues who are just ridiculously accomplished, and knowing some billionaires too who really believe that they don't have enough. That to me, that's one of those things. And just to go back, one of our famous Stanford dropouts, Elizabeth Holmes.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder, she was obviously a smart and very talented person, and still is. Now she's in prison. I wondered if she had slowed down and realized that she had enough, instead of striving for more and more and faster, if things might have turned out better for her. And so anyway, so that's a life lesson I try to remember.
One of my favorite phrases from Stoicism is want the things that you have. And it's related to this idea, like once you have enough, then just want those things. There's no reason to keep wanting more once we have enough. Well, Bob,
Okay.
This was awesome.
Well, I just you just got me ranting, but
I know you could go forever, but this is great. It forced you to kind of narrow down all the things you've learned in 40 years. These are 3 lessons that you most wanted to pass on.
Yeah, it's just a little comment about this conversation, that sometimes I don't know how it actually will come up, but I'm somebody who's prone to over prepare rather than under prepare, and the fact I was too busy to prepare might have made it better. Because it's like you're saying.
Well, I just appreciate your time, and these are just tremendous lessons. The attitude of wisdom, argue lovingly, and recognizing when we have enough, the knowledge to know that we have enough. So I just want to thank you for your time. And again, just to think of all of the wonderful experiences and things that you've learned throughout your career, that these are 3 things that you most want to pass along, just makes me value them that much more. So thank you for your time today, Bob.
Oh, thanks, Nate. It's great to talk to you. And thanks for doing this. We all appreciate you just conglomerating these lessons. I really appreciate it.